Einstein secretly confessed, "Death is not the end." These words were never meant to be spoken, they were not intended to be recorded, but they were said and preserved. Spring of 1954. Outside Princeton, a cold wind was blowing, embers crackled in the fireplace, and across from the journalist sat a man whose name had already become a legend during his lifetime. Albert Einstein, a tired but clear gaze, a quiet voice, and words that should never have been spoken. But they were spoken. The journalist, whose name never entered history, made the first note in his notebook. The question was asked almost in a whisper, as if he was afraid to hear the answer. "Professor, tell me honestly, do you believe that life continues after death?" The room fell silent. Einstein did not hurry. He raised his eyes to the window, where bare branches trembled in the dim light, and only then, with a faint, almost imperceptible smile, he said, "Believe is not the right word. At my age, I prefer to know." The journalist lowered his pen, astonished by such a beginning. He had expected to hear a cautious, "not proven," "unknown," "science is silent." But instead he heard a firm acknowledgement. "Forgive me, Professor, but hasn't official science always denied the soul?" he dared to clarify. "Not my science," Einstein gently corrected. "What people call science, in the eyes of the ordinary man, is limited only to what can be seen or measured. But there are things that cannot be fitted into formulas, and if a person does not see them, that does not mean they do not exist." He leaned closer, his voice a little lower. "Remember, life does not end with death. This is not a hypothesis. This is not a guess. This is a fact I reached by studying the very fabric of time and space." The journalist could not believe his ears. "Forgive me, are you speaking of immortality, of heaven?" Einstein shook his head. "I am speaking of continuation, of transformation. Imagine a wave in the ocean. As long as the wind blows, it rises and moves. The wind dies down, and the wave disappears. But does the water itself disappear? No, its energy remains in the ocean. Human consciousness is the same wave. The body is only a temporary form in which this wave manifests. When the form dies, the essence itself returns to the ocean." The journalist instinctively licked his dry lips. Inside, everything resisted, for this sounded almost like mysticism. "But what about the theory of relativity?" He found the words. A warm smile flickered across Einstein's face. "The theory of relativity describes matter and energy, but there is something that always escaped the formulas: the observer. Consciousness. It is not derived from matter. It is primary. The universe exists because someone perceives it. Mystics suspected this. I came to it through mathematics." His eyes shone with an unusual light. The double-slit experiment, the entanglement of quantum particles, all of this points to the same conclusion. Consciousness shapes reality, and after death, it does not disappear. It returns to the source, to pure perception. The journalist leaned forward. "Then, God exists?" Einstein paused for a moment as if weighing each word. God is not an old man with a beard on a cloud. God is the ocean itself. The consciousness of all beings merges within it. That is why no one who has ever lived disappears completely. Death is not the end, it is the return home. Outside, the wind howled dully. The journalist glanced at his notes, feeling his hands tremble from these words. "But how can a scientist of your level claim such a thing?" he asked quietly. Einstein looked straight into his eyes. "You think this is faith?" "No, this is knowledge. I saw patterns that cannot be explained within classical physics. My work on the unified field theory showed me. There exists a structure connecting matter, energy, and consciousness. At the beginning of the century, we thought the atom was the final brick of reality. But we were wrong. Beyond the atom is emptiness. Beyond emptiness are vibrations. Beyond vibrations, mind." The journalist hardly breathed. You mean to say— Yes, Einstein interrupted. Consciousness is not localized. It is not in the brain. The brain is only a receiver. The source lies outside space and time. Death is not the destruction of the receiver, but only the disconnection of the channel. The ether itself remains. He paused and added, Think about radio waves. A radio receiver can be broken, but the waves do not disappear anywhere. The journalist closed his eyes for a second, trying to comprehend what had been said. Inside, two voices struggled, the rational one and the one whispering, "This is the truth." Einstein fell silent for a moment, and in the room one could hear only the ticking of the clock. Its measured beat seemed like an echo of eternity, as if the universe itself was counting the moments. The journalist took a sip of cold air and once again dared to ask, "Forgive me, but why are you speaking of this only now?" Einstein smiled wearily. "Because time is running out. My body is giving way, and I am standing on the threshold. If I remain silent, the truth will go with me. I kept silent for many years, understanding that humanity was not yet ready. It is too easy to turn any truth into a weapon, into a tool of manipulation. But I feel the era of materialism is coming to an end. Soon science and spirituality will unite." He leaned slightly forward, as if entrusting a terrible secret. "Humanity stands before a discovery that will change everything. The understanding that death is not an enemy. It is a transition." The journalist nodded, his heart beating so strongly it pounded in his temples. "So, after death, something awaits us?" "Yes," said Einstein, "but it all depends on the level of awareness. Those who lived for power and pleasure will wander in the shadows of their own memories, and those who loved, who sought truth and served others, will merge with the source, find peace and a new beginning." "You mean to say," the journalist swallowed, "that there is a return?" Einstein nodded. "Yes. What they call reincarnation. But it is not an automatic process. It is a choice. Free will is the highest law. Consciousness returns in order to learn and to grow. But one day it can leave the circle, dissolving in the ocean of light. This is not an end, but liberation." He looked out the window, where the night sky seemed bottomless. "We are all travelers, and death is not a wall. It is a door." The journalist felt that one more question might change him forever, but it was impossible to hold back. Why then do other great minds not speak of this? Einstein sighed heavily. "Because the truth is too simple and too dangerous. A scientist fears ridicule. Religion fears losing power. Politicians fear losing control. Free truth is frightening to those who are accustomed to ruling, but some knew. Newton, Planck, Tesla, even Darwin, closer to the end of his life, suspected that behind evolution there was something more than chance, but all chose silence." He paused, and the journalist noticed that his hand trembled as he once again raised his pen. "Recently I once again looked at my famous formula," said Einstein quietly. "E, mc2. It showed the world the equivalence of mass and energy. But there is another level about which I was silent. Consciousness is also energy. Subtle, barely perceptible. And it, like any energy, is capable of transformation." The journalist looked up. "Then death does not exist." "The death of form exists. The death of the body, the death of the personality connected with a specific life. But the essence is immortal. The energy of consciousness does not disappear, it only changes its form. All who have ever lived continue to exist on other levels of reality. Their thoughts, feelings, experiences, all of it is preserved in an immense field, which some call Akasha, others the memory of the universe." The journalist involuntarily recalled his own strange premonitions and déjà vu, which could not be explained. "Then, Why suffering? Why illness, loss? Einstein looked intently, as if peering directly into his soul. Suffering is a school. Without pain, consciousness does not develop. Just as muscles grow under strain, so the spirit strengthens through trials. Every life is a lesson. Even the heaviest destinies have meaning. The human mind is not always able to see it, but one day everything will become clear, and we will understand no one was ever alone. All paths lead to unity. At that moment the clock struck midnight. 12 chimes resounded in the silence, like a sign from the universe itself. Einstein spoke again. But there is something that troubles me. In recent years I see a dangerous trend. Technology grows, but morality lags behind. People increasingly see enemies instead of reflections of themselves. This is dangerous. If humanity does not realize its true nature, it may not survive the next century. His voice became firm. Either we accept the truth, we are one, or we will destroy ourselves. The journalist felt that every word was imprinted on his consciousness like a fiery line. That is why I decided to give this interview, perhaps my last. Let my words be a reminder. Death is not the end. The enemy is not the person nearby. The true enemy is ignorance, and knowledge is light, and light always conquers darkness. The journalist felt his own heart trembling, as if he stood at the edge of an abyss, ready to take a step into the unknown. He did not dare to break the pause, but Einstein continued on his own, his voice now sounding different. There was a strange calm in it, as though he spoke not only for his companion, but for something greater, invisible. "You ask if this can be proven," he said quietly. "Science demands repeatability and measurability, but there are phenomena that cannot be confined within the framework of experiment. Their very existence is the proof." He raised his finger as if lecturing students, the memories of children about past lives, quantum entanglement, which cannot be explained without acknowledging non-material connections. Cases of clinical death, when people describe events happening outside their bodies, all of these are testimonies. Science will deny them to the very end. But denial is not refutation. The journalist listened, holding his breath. "Quantum physics has already broken a breach in the wall of materialism," Einstein continued. "Space is not empty. Time is not absolute. Matter is only an illusion of density. Everything is energy. Everything is consciousness. And the day will come when new devices will allow us to register changes in the fields of consciousness after the body's death. It is only a matter of time." He leaned forward. "But remember, even if tomorrow the world receives irrefutable proof of life after death, it will not solve the main task." "What task?" whispered the journalist. "To change the way of life, to accept responsibility. The understanding that death is not the end must not free us from fear, but elevate our actions. If people knew that their thoughts and deeds do not disappear, but continue to exist in the common field of reality, the world would change. But is humanity ready for such a truth? That is the question." At that moment, the door creaked softly, and an elderly woman in black entered the room, the professor's housekeeper. "Forgive me, gentlemen, it is already late. Professor, you need to rest." Einstein nodded, but his eyes did not leave the journalist. "I am tired," he said quietly. "The body is giving way, but the spirit is ready to continue. If someday, 10, 20, or 100 years from now, someone reads these lines, let them know I was not a mystic. I was a seeker of truth." With difficulty he rose, leaning on the table. "The truth belongs neither to religion nor to science. It belongs to the one who seeks." The journalist also rose, the words stuck in his throat. "Farewell, Professor." Einstein shook his head. "This is not farewell forever. We will meet again. where all paths converge. They shook hands. The handshake was firm, warm, as though confirming what had been said. "Remember," Einstein said softly, "death is awakening. For those who are ready to see." The journalist stepped into the hallway. Behind the door, silence remained. He felt that something inside him had changed forever. Outside, the air smelled of dampness and the freshness of spring. The first leaves were just beginning to bud on the branches. The wind was sharp, but in it was felt the breath of new life. The journalist walked down the alley, thinking of the professor's words. "We fear death because we fear losing, but there is nothing to lose. Everything that is true remains. Love, good deeds, memory, all of this continues." He took out his notebook and wrote these words on the last page, and never opened it again. But that night he understood the main thing. The question is not what awaits us after death. The question is how we live before it. Einstein remained at the window. In the half-light of dawn, his silhouette seemed especially fragile, but his eyes shone with quiet strength. He looked into the sky and whispered, "In my youth, I sought a formula to explain the universe. But with the years I realized the hardest thing is to understand oneself, the connection with others, the meaning of life. Science can be grasped, but meaning each must discover for himself." He paused, then added, "Do not be afraid to live. Do not be afraid to seek. Everything else is an illusion." Outside the window a thrush sang. A new day was beginning. Einstein stood at the window, and the first rays of dawn slowly fell across his face. The journalist, already outside, lingered at the gate, as though an inner voice urged him to turn back. Deep in the house, the silhouette of the professor appeared, thin, almost transparent, yet filled with a strength that transcended the body. That image was etched into memory forever. The road led toward the city center, but the journalist felt that he was not merely walking down an alley, but through time itself. Einstein's words echoed in his mind. "Death is a door. Consciousness is primary. We are one." He involuntarily lifted his gaze to the sky, where gray clouds slowly parted, revealing a deep blue beyond. It seemed as if nature itself was confirming what he had heard. Meanwhile, in his study, Einstein continued to reflect aloud, speaking more to himself than to anyone else. His voice was tired, but clear. Humanity stands at a crossroads. We have created machines that can calculate faster than a man can think. We have split the atom, yet we have not learned to master our own anger. We look into space, yet we have forgotten how to look into each other's eyes. This is a dangerous path. If we do not realize our unity, technology will turn against us. He closed his eyes, as if seeing not the room, but the coming decades. In the future, people will hold in their hands a power capable of destroying the planet, and if their hearts remain deaf to the truth, they themselves will be the cause of their own downfall. But if they understand that every consciousness is connected with all others, then the path to a new world will open. Einstein paced the room, leaning on his cane. His step showed weakness, but his thoughts remained sharp as a blade. "You know," he muttered softly, though no one was there, "we have always sought proof outside ourselves. But the truth is within. Man fears to look where silence dwells. He fears to hear himself. But it is there that the door to eternity opens." He stopped at the desk where sheets with formulas, drafts, and notes lay scattered. On top rested his famous formula, E-MC2, written in firm handwriting. Einstein traced the paper with his finger and said thoughtfully, "People see only the equivalence of mass and energy. But behind this formula lies another level. Consciousness is also energy. It cannot be weighed, but it can be felt. It does not vanish. It returns to the source, and there is neither fear nor pain." He looked once more to the window, and saw the sun slowly painting the sky with gold. "This is awakening," he whispered. "Everything returns to the light." Meanwhile, the journalist had already reached the newsroom, but instead of sitting down at the typewriter to record his notes, he sat in silence, staring at the empty sheet of paper. He understood. What he had heard could not simply be printed in a newspaper. It was more than a sensation. It was knowledge that could either elevate humanity or destroy it. He closed his eyes and recalled the professor's gaze, weary, yet full of light. "This cannot be lost," he whispered, "but it is too soon to show it to the world." He locked the notebook in his desk drawer and sighed. Somewhere within, a feeling grew that these records would see the light only when their time came. Hours passed. The city awoke. The noise of the streets grew louder. People hurried about their business, unaware that in a small house nearby, words had been spoken that could change everything. But so it always is. Truth comes quietly, while the world sleeps. Einstein, meanwhile, sank into his chair and closed his eyes. Before his inner vision flickered scenes of his life, youthful years in Zurich, debates in Berlin, lectures in America, the joy of discoveries and the grief of war. But above all rose one thing, a sense of connection. He clearly saw that not a single moment is lost, that every thought and every action is forever woven into the fabric of the universe. "The meaning of life is not in accumulation," he whispered, "but in understanding and in loving." At that moment, the clock struck again, a single chime. A new hour began, and with it, a new silence. Einstein opened his eyes and smiled, as if greeting an old friend. "Yes," he said, "death is awakening. But the most important thing is to awaken while still alive." The next day, Einstein did not rise. His path was ending. But if one believes his own words, in truth it was only beginning. Years later, the journalist reread his notebook, and each time his heart froze. He never dared to publish those lines, knowing the world was not yet ready. But one day the truth would be heard, and the truth is simple. Death is not the end. It is a return home. The journalist closed the notebook. On the last page, in Einstein's own hand, were the words, "Death is awakening." Outside, a lone thrush sang, heralding a new day. Einstein was gone, but his revelation remained. And now the question stands before each of us. If death is not the end, how will we live this life?